Hi, I'm Jill Allor. This is the second video in a two-part series that is an expanded version of a talk that I just did for the Ontario Association for Developmental Education. In the first part, I talked about the research, what we know about teaching literacy to students with developmental disabilities. And in this part, I'm going to talk about how we put that into practice. And I'm going to give you 7 tips or 7 recommendations for teaching students with developmental disabilities to read. My first recommendation is to give every student an opportunity to learn to read in a way that is consistent with research and theory about reading development. I have a picture here of the What Works Clearinghouse Practice Guide on teaching foundational skills for students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. These are recommendations for all students learning how to read that show you how to provide those students with the skills necessary to develop into highly skilled readers. And we want that same opportunity for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. These are the 4 main recommendations that are in that practice guide, and all 4 of these apply to students with intellectual disability. The first one is to address meaning and language. That needs to be done from the very beginning. The second one is about our awareness of the sounds in spoken language, or phonemic awareness, and making those connections to print. The third one is decoding words and analyzing word parts, as well as writing and recognizing words. And then the fourth one is applying those skills in connected text. So the recommendations that are in that practice guide definitely apply to students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But as I talked in the first talk about the research, we do need to be very careful that we are doing this in an intensive way for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and that we're doing it with very high degrees of fidelity, and we're accommodating their needs, that we're customizing the curriculum and the way that we're teaching in order to meet their needs. My second recommendation is that you follow a systematic scope and sequence, and that you explicitly teach the most important skills, teaching those key skills. We know that it's important to have a systematic scope and sequence and follow that whenever you're teaching all kids the beginning reading skills. And we also know that we need to teach those skills explicitly. And one thing that I think is particularly important for kids with intellectual disability is we want to be sure to focus on key skills. What are those skills that are most important? What I have pictured here for you is the scope and sequence from Friends on the Block, which is available free on our website, and you can see the skills that we target and the sequence that we follow. So you can use our scope and sequence as a guide and make sure that these are skills that whatever program you're using is emphasizing, because these are all skills that we know to be critically important. Our scope and sequence is a bit more streamlined than some other programs. There are some skills that we do not focus on, and we have very intentionally focused on those skills that we have seen are the most important ones to teach, that are absolutely critical. You certainly want to include all of the important strands. These include language comprehension and vocabulary, so this meaning, phonemic awareness, phonics and word recognition, fluency of passages, so you need to build that automaticity with phonics and word recognition and ensure that students are able to read effortlessly so they are able to focus on comprehension. And writing and spelling should be part of any strong program. The spelling is the inverse of decoding or sounding out words, and those two skills go hand in hand and help reinforce one another. This graphic shows you the key skills that help students move from phonemic awareness to the alphabetic principle, making that transition from letters, sounds, to actually using those letters and sounds to read and spell words. So the first row deals with first sound. Often the very first skill that we're going to teach in phonemic awareness is isolating the first sound in a spoken word. So if the teacher says mat, and ask the student, what's the first sound in mat? the student would be able to say, And then the opposite of that would be blending the first sound with the rest of the word. So if the teacher said, at, what's that word? The student would say mat. Now the next level is when they're able to use all individual phonemes within words. So here, if you're segmenting, the teacher would say, tell me the sounds in mat. And the student would be able to say, mat. Or the teacher would say, listen, at. What word? Mat. And I'm going to go ahead and stop here and model that if they're not able to do that, you want to stretch the sounds like I'm doing, but you also can connect them to give them even more support and help them figure out the word. So you can say mat. Notice I didn't stop between sounds. Mat. What's that word? Mat. So stretching and connecting is a really important way to help students who are still developing this skill. And then you want to connect that to print. Now you can work on these bottom two rows at the same time. So you can practice blending and segmenting with letters. The word mat is very common sounds, letter sound correspondences. So if students know those letter sounds, you can have them look at the letters, mat, and then sound that out. Or you can have them listen to the word and then build that word. So listen, spell the word mat, and then they can spell M-A-T and pull those letters down if they're using magnetic letters, or write those if they're writing them. What happens with phonemic awareness is that the more you are able to decode, the better your phonemic awareness skills are, and the better your phonemic awareness skills are, the more you can decode. So you have this reciprocal relationship where you're learning you're getting better at phonemic awareness, and that helps you to sound out with print. And the more you're sounding out and spelling with print, the better your phonemic awareness is going to be. These next slides are all examples of how to explicitly teach those key skills. So this is an explicit script that can help you teach very clearly students how to blend. So I'll give you an example. So I'll say the sounds in a word, then you will say the word. I'll do the first one. Listen. G-oat. That word is goat. Say the word, and then the students would say goat. And then you practice with another one. Listen. Fish. Say the word, and then the students would say fish. Now, if they're not able to put that together, like they say ish, or they say something else, or they just repeat one of the sounds, then you can say, you want to always provide corrective feedback and scaffolding. So you would say, listen, fish. Notice how I stretched and connected those. And maybe then they'll hear the word and they'll be able to say fish. But if they're not able to say fish, then you would just go even faster. Fish, fish, fish. What's the word? Fish. So you always want to model and then have them copy you as much as possible. Now this is a script for the inverse of that. So here I will say a word. Then you will say each sound in the word one at a time. The first word is fish. Listen to me say the sounds. Ish. Say the sounds with me. And so the students would say that with you. Ish. Listen. Goat. Say the sounds. And then the students would say goat. And if they're not able to say goat, you want to immediately model for them. The sounds in goat are g-oat. Say it with me. G-oat. Now your turn. And then you would have the students do it by themselves. In Friends on the Block, we practice these skills with games. And so this is an example of one of our games. This one is available right now for free on our website. So I would encourage you to go if you want to download this game. During this game, students can practice blending and or segmenting. So you would do exactly what you just did and what I just modeled for you. So listen. Ish. What's that word? And hopefully the students can say fish, and then they find the picture of the fish and put their bingo marker. But just like you would do during instruction when you're practicing with the game, if they don't know the answer, then you want to model and have them do it with you and then have them repeat it by themselves. This is a very basic script for teaching the letter sounds. You also want to do this very explicitly. If you've already introduced these, then you would just say, when I touch the letter, say the letter sound. Remember to say the sound for as long as I touch it. And so you would tap the letter C, because it is a stop sound, very quick, and the students would say K. The T is also a quick sound, so you would tap it, T, as well as the P, P. But the M and the S are both continuous sounds, so you'd want to hold your finger down for 2 to 3 seconds on each of those, so they get in the habit of stretching those sounds that can be stretched. I have more information about which sounds are continuous sounds and which sounds are stop sounds in other videos, and I'll provide you with that information as well. Here's one of our games where students practice the letter sounds. Of course, kids need to make the connection from doing these sounds orally to the print. And as I said before, they can learn these at the same time. I'm going to show you an activity in just a couple of minutes that demonstrates how to do that. But when you're practicing sounding out words, you definitely want to model for them. So, mad, mad. So the directions for this activity are, you're going to say the sounds in a word and then say the word. Listen as I sound it out. Mad, mad. Now you sound it out, and the students would do that. And you keep practicing with each of those. So for these words, it's really important that they say each sound and then say the word. So you know they're really attending to each letter sound, and they're learning the strategy of blending and sounding out words. So even when they can recognize them quickly, during this activity, we're really focused on the strategy of how to blend and how to sound out words. Here's the game I was mentioning where you can practice sounding out. And when you play this game, you're developing both phonemic awareness and letter sound correspondence, and you're applying this with the print. So students are able to do this. The way this game works, it's very simple. You just draw a letter, you say the sound of the letter on the card, and if you have that letter on your board, here we have a picture. This is actually my co-author, Jennifer Cheatham. So I've got this picture of her. She's in a book that's about Rick Gets Lost. And at the end of the book, it says, I am not mad. So here, as you draw the letters, when you draw the letters for M, A, and D, you practice saying those sounds and you put a bingo marker over each one. And once you've drawn all 3 of those letters, then you sound out that word and you read the sentence. And these are sentences that are taken from the book. So this way, students are making connections with meaning from the word, that they know what that word means, it's a common word, and to the book. The inverse skill to decoding is encoding or spelling. Here, what you want students to do is to say the sounds and then write the letter that goes with each sound. So to give you an example, I will say a word, then you will say each sound in the word one at a time. Then you will write the word. The first word is it. Listen to me say the sounds. It. And then you would model, as you say I, you would write the I. And when you say t, you'd write the T. And so you'd model that out and then give them another word to do. Listen, him. Say the sounds, and the students would say I, and then they would write the word. And as they write the word, you want them to be saying those sounds. So a very straightforward activity. We also have a version of that same game where you can spell that word first and then play the game. So you can practice segmenting to spell. These are just another way to apply what's very commonly used, Elkonin boxes. So there are lots of places you'll see those. It's a great activity to do. So now moving on to recommendation number 3. Recommendation number 3 is to practice high frequency decodable and irregular words a lot. You want kids to practice these words many times so they become automatic and they can recognize these words very, very quickly without any effort. And for students with intellectual disability, this takes more practice, but they can definitely learn this and do this well. And when they're able to recognize those words effortlessly, then they can focus more on the meaning of what they're reading. This is our Friends on the Block list of all high-frequency words, and our list is divided between those words that you can sound out once you learn those patterns, and those words that are irregular or temporarily irregular until you learn those patterns. So you can use our list. It's available free for you to download if you'd like, or compare our list to your list. Whatever list you are using of high-frequency words, just be sure you are dividing them into those that the kids can sound out and those that they cannot sound out or that they cannot sound out easily. So you want to practice sounding out those that can be sounded out. So if they don't know that word quickly, then they should sound it out and then say it. And then practicing doing that, eventually they need to get to where they don't need to sound it out. But anytime they don't know it, they should definitely sound it out. The fourth recommendation is to practice words in meaningful connected text. Sentences or stories. You can write your own sentences or you can use published stories. And you want to do this as soon as possible. In our program, you learn a few words and you immediately practice those words in a book. We use the book Sam's Lunch, and there are a couple of others that are at the same level, and any of those can be used as our first lesson. And in that very first lesson, we have them practice those words in the book. If they don't know any of those words, if they're all brand new, then we're going to use an echo read. So let me show you our level 1 book. We have the gray helper text that's read by the teacher. So the teacher would say, Tim said, I have 2 muffins. Do you want a muffin? And then the student would read the part in white that's Sam talking. So Sam is going to say, I do not want a muffin. And if this is a student who hasn't learned many letter sounds, you'll remember from the previous video, we had students who were participating in the program that didn't even know all their letters yet. And what we did with them was a quick echo read where I would point and read to each word, I do not want a muffin, and they would repeat that right after the teacher, and they would need to point to each word. And there are a number of things that they're learning when they do this. Part of it is meaning, so they're making connections to the meaning. They're understanding this connection between these words, and these words are in a book, and spoken language is written down. They're also learning to recognize that there are spaces between the words, and then they're also going to eventually be able to recognize these words, or at least differentiate them from one another. Very simple. Just these words are the ones that are repeated throughout the book. It's the words a, do, I, like, not, and want. They're the only 6 words that the students are practicing in this book, and then there are 3 other books that are in level 1. So they may need to stay in that level a little while. They're learning their letter sounds, they're learning phonemic awareness, they're getting ready to decode, but in the meantime, we're practicing reading with just a small handful of irregular words that they don't yet have the skills to sound out, and they're able to see what reading is all about and get into a book and help make connections across those strands. This is another example of a book that includes, this one includes both words you can sound out and some irregular words. And this is a level 4 book, so what the student is reading includes all the words they've been learning in levels 1 through 4. So there's a lot of cumulative review and practice, and we're putting those into books, into sentences and books right away. I would recommend if you're using decodable readers and you feel like the story is a little hard for the kids to comprehend, one thing you may want to do is add your own helper text. You don't have to write it down, but as you're reading in the book, you can explain a bit of what's going on in the book. So you can help the kids develop listening comprehension along with their reading comprehension, because some of those stories require quite a bit of inferencing to understand, and you have to infer the meaning based on what you know your knowledge that you bring to the book and based on the pictures and what would typically happen in a story like that. So for students with intellectual disabilities, sometimes it can be really difficult for them to comprehend a typical decodable reader. So feel free to add some spoken language to that as you just tell the story a little bit and they can still read the text, and then you want to add a little bit to it, and that can help them with comprehension. The fifth recommendation is to use a technique called dialogic reading to build language comprehension. This is a technique that it was developed specifically for preschoolers and pre-readers to give them a chance to talk about a story and develop language ability, both comprehending what's in a story, but also just building their ability to express themselves and to comprehend general language. So we've used this technique and we've applied it to written text, as well as we do have, of course, as I just explained, some text that you read to the kids and then the part that they read. And these are some examples of dialogic reading questions. Remember, the purpose is to engage kids in a discussion. It does start with different levels of dialogic reading questions. The easiest level is going to be very, very basic. What color is the sky? Maybe what color is Sam's shirt? What is this? And you point to the dog and they say dog. So some very basic questions. And then it moves up to more advanced questions that you might be asking. Why does Sam ask the girl if she is mad? Or what are some things that make you mad or scared? So here you're wanting to engage the students in a little more conversation. So we've provided in our materials questions that are easy to more difficult, or at least ones that will help you to bring in your prior knowledge and your knowledge of the world as you're reading your book. I'll also provide you with some resources to learn more about dialogic reading. The sixth recommendation is to provide immediate corrective feedback. Frequently from my graduate students who are teachers, they tell me that this piece of advice was one of the most important things that they learned during our courses. It was a game changer. And what we mean is to provide corrective feedback really quickly. If they're reading in a book and they miss a word, within 2 to 4 seconds, you want to tell them that word. So this applies to all basic skills that you don't want to give a whole lot of thinking time. You really want to show them the answer, have them practice. You want more practice time than you want thinking time. Now, higher order skills and questioning, there are other skills that, of course, you want more thinking time. But for these basic skills, you usually want to provide the answer within 2 to 4 seconds. If they don't know the word, they're likely not going to remember it just by giving them an extended period of time to think about it. Now, if they're in the middle of sounding out a word and making progress, of course, let them sound it out. But if they're stuck, you want to get them unstuck. This gives them time to practice the skill correctly. It uses your time more efficiently, and it's also so much less frustrating for a student and for the teacher for that matter. So the process is a basic I, we, you, repeat strategy. So the I part, you're going to say, listen, and then model it, just like what I've been doing. And then the we part is do it with me. And then the you part is to give them a turn to see if they can get it, and then you want to repeat. Whenever you're reading in a book, I highly encourage you to go back to the beginning of the sentence. So anytime a student misses a word, you want to go back, you want to go ahead and fix it. Stop right there, tell them what the word is, have them say it with you, and then have them say it by themselves, but then you want to start at the beginning of the sentence. This does a couple of things. One, it gives them a chance to practice that word again right away, but it also gets them back into the meaning of the story and gets them into the habit of, if I have to stop and figure something out, I need to go back to the beginning of the sentence so I can make sense of this. So these are the specific recommendations for a book reading and the feedback you would give during book reading. First, you want to think about, notice the word that they missed, and if that's a word that they have the skills to sound out, you want to follow this procedure. If it's a word that they don't have the skills to sound out, then follow this procedure. So essentially, you can tell them, you can always remind them, sound it out if it's a word that can be sounded out. But if they're not able to do that, then you want to sound it out for the student, have them sound it out with you, and then have them sound it out by themselves. And then you notice that last part is to repeat the sentence. And very similarly, if it's an irregular word, they don't recognize it, then you want to tell them what the word is, have them say that word with you, and then they say it by themselves and repeat the sentence. Now, if the student is making a lot of mistakes and getting frustrated, you might want to revert to an echo read where you echo sentence by sentence. I wouldn't echo one word at a time, but I would read an entire sentence and then have them repeat that sentence. But you only want to use echo read if they're not able to do it by themselves. So that's an important thing to consider, is not overusing echo read. You want to use echo read when it's necessary, but the point is for students to develop independence. The last recommendation is to monitor progress on those key skills and provide students with intensive practice on the skills that they have not yet mastered. So you want to provide them with fun activities where they can get a lot of practice in a short period of time with those important skills. Finally, I want to say thank you to the students who've been in our projects and their families. They are teaching us so much about how to teach everyone to read. These are some of the main resources of references for articles that I mentioned in the talk, particularly the first part of the talk. And then this is a picture to tell you about our video blog. If you want to find out more about how to use these techniques, I strongly encourage you to look at the blog that I've been making, and more will be coming hopefully very soon. You can find the blog, references, activities, information on our Friends on the Block website. This is a link to the What Works Clearinghouse Practice Guide that I mentioned in the first video, and a link to more information about Dialogic reading. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. I hope you'll log on to Friends on the Block. And if you're not already a free member, join our free membership, and that will give you access to 17 of our e-readers along with some free games. Thank you so much.